It seems that no one will want to ignore 170 million people, and the grey middle class out there are. The capital income is improving despite the fact that it may still be low.
Opportunities, I mean, look at the infrastructure, lack of infrastructure that we have. If tomorrow now government put this structure straight and invite private investment into it, there's an opportunity.
I would like us to look at the issue before we go on break. We're going to go on break in a minute, but let's just look at this. I'm going to come to Abiola. The drivers of these returns, let's now break it down furthermore. And we're looking at the fact that Fitch said that the foreign exchange markets, the international reserves are stabilizing after the shock of central bank's Governor Sanusi's suspension in February. Now, demand for foreign exchange in the official auction, all of these are part of the drivers to make Fitch ratings to say that we are still not doing very badly, we're still stable. So what's your take about these factors?
I think those factors are correct. And I think one important thing is to look at what is the drivers of those stabilities, particularly in the foreign exchange markets. The CBN has been the major, let me say, quote and unquote, the visible hand sustaining that stability in the currency. For example, in the last couple of weeks, we've seen some pressure on the Naira, particularly as demand continues to increase on the back of the seasonal imports that we typically experience between late September and early October. Beyond that, we've seen a couple of foreign portfolio outflows into the country, and that's caused some level of pressure on the Naira. But I think the interesting thing is the fact that the CBN remains committed to the stability of the Naira, which is why we continue to see CBN intervening in the interbank market from time to time to ensure that the Naira doesn't go beyond their comfort level. For example, once Naira gets to about 164 to 50 Naira at the interbank market, the CBN typically comes in to provide support, which is why, in my view, I think, yes, that's important. And the ability of the CBN to do that over the near time to medium time is what is important to us, to be sure whether the CBN has the capacity to actually support the Naira, which I think to some extent they do, given the level of reserves and given expectation that the upcoming election, Naira to a very large extent would be stable despite the pressure that we expect from political spending. Beyond that, I think inflation, which has also been a concern, you notice inflation has been on the increase over the past 6 months. For example, the August inflation was 8.5% as against 8.3% that we had in July. That's about 20 basis point increase, but that's still within the CBN band of 6 to 9% expectation for the year. And I think it's also very important to actually notice that we're expecting September inflation to be out on the 16th of this month, which is just on Thursday. I do expect that we'll see inflation around 8.4%. So that's going to be a 10% more, a 10 basis point moderation, which I think these are some of the factors that actually allude to the fact that Fitch seems to have some level of justification for this stable outlook. And it's very important to us actually note the fact that between that rating, between the day they communicated that rating on the 3rd of October and now, we've actually seen some moderation on the Eurobond, the Nigerian Eurobond. We've seen about 10 basis point moderation in terms of yield. For example, you look at the shortest end of that curve now, which is the 2018 instrument, currently trading at just about 4.11%, as again 4.25% that we had before this communication of this new ratings affirmation from Fitch. So I think to a very large extent this is positive for Nigeria, but of course the most important thing is not now. The most important thing is to be sure that we're able to sustain some of those fundamentals, particularly as we go towards the election cycle, which I think is very, very important from a political risk point of view, which of course would also affect the rating and might possibly improve the rating, or maybe cause the ratings downgrade, as it were, depending on what comes out of the election cycle, particularly the general elections in February 2015. So that's very important, which is why I said this is an opinion, and we just need to continue to work towards the stability that we've seen, and of course continue to work on some of the weaknesses that have been identified by Fitch.
We're talking about the elections that are just around the corner. We've seen some states actually having to run elections. But let's take a look at the impacts of all of this on Nigeria's economic outlook. I'm going to go to Femi this time around. The president has expressed some appreciation and actually happy about these returns. But how do we sustain the outlook? That is the next thing that we think we should be looking at right now. Because if S&P had come to say no, it's negative, and Fitch had come to say it's stable, we do not know which ratings will come out next to say, oh, it's negative again. So how do we sustain this stable outlook, Femi?
I mean, first of all, like we said earlier, the most important thing is not the headline, because that is judgmental. But the most important thing that the fundamentals that drive that headline implication. Okay, now it's stable. Why? How? Now, we've looked at all those fundamentals there, and we're saying that this is what we need to do to make sure that we keep developing on this, keep growing them to ensure that the fundamentals are right and correct. Now, the point you mentioned is about the political risk. The president is happy about the headline affirmation about outlook as stable by Fitch. But the question is, how do we ensure that we keep on doing this to make sure that all the fundamentals keep being positive, so that we should move forward, or at least keep their outlook stable? Two things there. Number one, we need the political will to do that. There's always that political risk that when the election is coming, participants, usually, let's say government people who are contesting election, they usually leave governance and focus on campaign most of the time. And there's that a lot of things that were supposed to be done will be put on hold. Except the institution where we have institutions that can run on their own without political interference or dependent on political appointees or whatever they are to run things. Institution in Nigeria where the political office holder usually hold all the power and not the institution holding power might have that effect. But if the government can decide as a will that, you know what, we need to willingly decide to do this together, then everything will be fine. Now, again, it is not only the federal government. It's not only the president to say, I'm happy about what happened in Nigeria. All people involved, all the governors, all the local government chairmen must feel the same way. Because, again, part of the reason why we are growing now is the international research that we are building, is the ECA that we are building, which the World Bank wants us to do more on. Now, it is not the federal government alone that's going to do it. All the three tiers of government have to work together to do that. The ECA, in the first instance, I'm not even sure whether it is legalized yet. There's the issue about the legal thing there. According to the Constitution, we have only the federation account. All money should be to the federation account and should be shared across the two tiers. Now, the ECA was created based on understanding that we all want to save. Right? But now, there's always that argument that no, we don't want to save. It's unconstitutional, it's illegal, it's this. All the money should be shared to all of us. Now, if you want to build the buffer, then it means that you all have to sit at the round table, decide that it makes sense, have the will to go and go ahead with it. So if the ECA is still not legalized, then we need to legalize it. So that everybody understands that we need to keep this, and this is how it's supposed to be shared. If you don't have up to 10 billion, we're not going to share anything. I mean, we can arrange all this, and that's why I said it's political will. And not only the president, but everybody involved have to sit down and agree.
All right, Viola, still talking political will, how do we increase the excess credit account? Because from the World Bank meeting that is just being concluded, is actually concluded, the World Bank was saying that Nigeria needs to build its excess credit account from $4 billion to $6 billion. So what do we need to do to ensure that we build it, going by the fact that the elections are here? I know this is a period that Nigeria recorded a remarkable increase in spending, government spending. So how do we achieve that?
I think there are three major things that we need to focus on. I think the first thing is to look at what are the major sources of external earnings for us, foreign exchange earnings. The first one is oil, which is why we need to block the leakages in the oil sector. You actually notice the fact that the government actually expressed that will in the second quarter of the year, which was why we saw a growth in terms of crude oil production and, of course, the output in crude oil. For example, in the crude oil sector, for example, we saw a growth of around 6.5% in the second quarter of the year, and that's largely because of the fact that production levels increased to about 2.21 from 2.11 million barrels per day. So we need to block the leakages in the oil sector, particularly as we move towards election. Once we block those leakages, which I think is very important for us now, particularly that oil prices are coming down, WTI $88, Bonnie Light $95.2. So as the price continues to come down, the only opportunity that we have is to increase the level of production, which is why those leakages need to be blocked. That's the first thing. So once we do that, we're likely to see more foreign currency earnings coming in for the country in terms of oil sale receipts. Beyond that, I think it's also very important to also encourage the CBN to continue to sustain the level of oversight we've seen in the foreign exchange market.
I was just going to ask you, because of our time, in the issue of having to retain its monetary and financial policy.
I'm going there.
We've seen that
links from the CBN.
Yeah,
you notice the fact that the second thing is the fact that the CBN needs to have that oversight function over the foreign exchange market. We've seen a couple of reforms within the BDC segment. The CBN needs to sustain that reform and needs to keep that oversight function. Beyond that, we may also need to attract more foreign direct investment into the country, and particularly foreign portfolio inflows in the near term. In the near term, we can rely on foreign portfolio inflows while we begin to work on some of the structural reforms to ensure foreign direct investment comes in, particularly after the election. But foreign portfolio inflows need to be sustained in the country, and for us to do that, we may need to see a little higher yield environment in the market for us to be able to attract more flows into the country. But beyond that, I think the federal government and the state government also need to take on fiscal consolidation as a responsibility, particularly as we move towards election when you typically expect most state governments to relatively increase their spending, and even the federal government. So I think this is a point for consolidation, and the federal government needs to do that for us to be able to have the level of reserve savings that is required, and of course that is also guided by the World Bank. Even something a little more than that, $6.3 billion, for example, for HECA on the back for a request from the World Bank, I think is just a number. The most important thing is to ensure that we keep the level of reserves that is adequate enough to actually absorb shock in case, particularly now that house prices are on the decline. So in my view, I think these four things are very important for the government: fiscal consolidation, block the leakages in the oil sector, which is a major source of foreign exchange earnings for Nigeria. Foreign portfolio inflows needs to be encouraged with higher yield environment, and of course work on the structural reforms to bring in foreign direct investment, and of course you build a strong buffer.
Okay, I'm afraid I have to end this conversation because of our time. I wanted to ask Femi what he thinks, if he agrees with you totally in terms of what we need to do to keep the stability and even move to more stable grounds. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you so much, Abiola Razak, the Head of Research and Strategy at the Associated Discount Health, and Femi Ademola is also the Head of Research at Pt2. And we've been talking about Nigeria's bond market, the sovereign bond market that is. We have different kinds of bond markets, but this is about the sovereign debt market, and it's been stable so far according to Fitch Ratings. We hope that the stability is sustained and we move forward to more positive grounds. And that'll be it here on Business Morning. Thank you so much for watching. We do appreciate your time with us as well. I am Bolaji Akinwale.